sanitary towel on his head. And so the fashion parade, if that is what it was, went on. The punk rebels of 1976 and 1978 saw the 60s in much the same way. Their stripped-down, furious music, echoing the naked truth aesthetic of Lennon's 1970 primal album, John Lennon Plastic Ono Band. To them, the preceding decade had been a silly self-indulgence, followed by a 6-year hangover of complacent grandiloquence, which had palidated the energy of pop culture. Horrid hippies. The self-styled beautiful people with their vague ideals and LSD-decelerated minds were the problem, speed, sarcasm, and deliberate ugliness the solution. Dress code, spiked hair, ripped t-shirts, safety pins through the face. By the early 80s, the 60s had declined into a subject of cynical indifference to Thatcher's deregulated anti-society, simultaneously turning into a standard target of left-wing alternative comedy, reviled from both sides. A figure of futility, the burlesque hippie was an unkempt and pathetic dreamer, body unwashed and mind blown by drugs. Yet, at the same time, this object of scorn seemed to be a scapegoat for some obscure sense of loss. It was considered a truism that the 60s had been an empty style display, a concept the 80s had little trouble grasping. But if the ambitions of the 60s generation had really been so irrelevant and impractical, why such resentment at its supposed failure to realize them? At any rate, the hippies seemed to have got something right. During the second half of the 80s, bored with the mechanical products of so much contemporary pop, a new generation seized on the passionately imaginative music of the 60s, elevating to cult status the records of Jimi Hendrix, The Doors, The Byrds, Led Zeppelin, and the Velvet Underground. The only comparable 80s artist, Prince, digressed into a brief Beatles phase with a pastiche of their LSD period in his album Around the World in a Day. More than a few of his peers admitted that they not only revered the sound of the 60s, but approved the ideals associated with them. Persisting into the late 80s, this style rehabilitation of the disappearing decade was enthusiastically embraced in the acid house dance idiom of the second summer of love, with its psychedelic fashions, LSD reviving raves, and electric sampling of 60s soul classics. A mood-altering mode, which has hardly been out of fashion since, owing to the omnipresent influence of self-amplifying drugs like ecstasy. At the beginning of the 90s, however, the retro vogueness of the 60s temporarily faded, as that era came under attack from the right-wing political culture in search of something to blame for the socio-economic chaos it had created in the 80s. Far from failing, claimed these critics, the 60s revolution had succeeded only too well. The rising rates of assault, rape, robbery, drug abuse, divorce, and abortion were all the fault of the permissive society supposedly fomented by left-wing subversives in the 60s. Likewise, the parallel declines in industrial and academic performance, respect for authority, and general attention span. In America, young conservatives accused their parental generation, the baby boomers, born in the late 40s, of creating the 90s victim dependency culture of casual violence, trash consumerism, and semi-literate political correctness. 60s anti-institutionalism had, they claimed, wrecked the nation's education system and plundered its social security coffers, leaving a national deficit which today's young will spend their lives paying off, supposing they can find jobs. As for the 60s sexual revolution, it merely produced a flood of pornography and high-divorce, low-legitimacy underclass of sullenly, unsocialized, and unemployable youth. To these critics, everything wrong with modern America was the fault of the irresponsible free-lunch hedonists who liberated the Woodstock Festival instead of standing dutifully in line for tickets. Rising to the bait, the boomers launched a counterattack, claiming au contraire that most of the civic breakdown in Britain and America after the early 80s was caused by the socially ruinous tax phobia of the right. Reagan, they pointed out, may not have agreed in so many words with Thatcher's claim that there is no such thing as society, but his monetarism said the same in fiscal language. As for Woodstock, it was, in venture capital terms, indubitably a shambles, yet one untypical of the West Coast counterculture.
To keep listening to this audiobook for free, click the link in the description. It will take you to a free Audible trial where you can listen to this and many other books for free for 30 days.